We'd like to thank you all for coming today to our seminar, which is entitled Lost in Translation, The Guide to Working Abroad. My name is Candace Nashman, and this is
Mavec.
Mujtaba.
Shelby, Cowart. And today we are going to share with you some key aspects about intercultural communication. Specifically today we're going to be talking about why work overseas. So hopefully today you'll walk away with some general information on working overseas, some intercultural theories that apply to working overseas, and then also hopefully we'll leave you with some tools that can equip you with the things that you need to actually go ahead and apply for jobs and work overseas in a successful way. So first part, why work overseas. 2, we're going to address cultural sensitivity. 3, we're going to talk a little bit about what is this idea of diversity, assimilation, and then tools. And so we really want you to be able to have the skills to, when you go overseas, to actually be able to integrate with the culture in a way that you can feel comfortable and do it with success. So I'm going to be talking to us about some of the reasons for, okay, why would I even want to work abroad in the first place? So I'm going to address what I would call the obvious reasons. So the first one is that working overseas, you get to apply classroom experience to the real world working environment. So, you know, a lot of what you learn in college is kind of theoretical, and you have these concepts and these tools, but you don't really have a chance to put them to practice. And so working overseas kind of gives you a chance to do that. And so, for example, you know, you might be taking intercultural communication, for example. You can take what you've learned in that class and really apply it to a nation and a culture that is not your own. Secondly, you have a chance to develop a degree of flexibility and resourcefulness. So, you know, many of us are college students and we haven't necessarily been out in quote-unquote the real world. And so working overseas gives you a chance to learn to be flexible and adapt to the culture and society around you. 3, develop a broader understanding of a new culture. And so working overseas is a great way to immerse yourself in a new environment and a new culture, and so to speak, kind of, I think of it as like jumping off into the deep end. So you're just immersed with the language, the culture, the food, the family dynamics. You're having to learn the new culture when you work overseas. It prepares oneself to be informed and engaged in the global economy. So it's really important, I think, skill set to be able to adapt to the global economy. A lot of what's happening in business these days is not just in the United States, but it's really essential to know what's happening in the world in general. And 5, improve intercultural and interpersonal skills. That's pretty straightforward. When you're in a different culture, you're having to interact with people and develop and nurture those interpersonal skills that maybe you've learned in class, but you're not yet putting them to practice. So these are what I call the not so obvious reasons, which these are kind of more lighthearted, but I think really do apply to working overseas. Number 6, you always have a conversation starter. So if you're, you know, at Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas dinner with your family, you have the ability to talk about your new experiences and different cultures that you've interacted with if you've worked overseas. You can reinvent yourself. So sometimes in college you kind of can get pegged as, you know, a certain way, or people can kind of label you in a specific way. Well, if you work overseas, you can kind of have a chance to reinvent yourself, get to know new people. They don't have this lens of seeing you like you've had for the last 4 years. It makes you more interesting at home. So it kind of goes with number 6. It gives you conversation starters. It gives you just, yeah, a new experience to be able to interact with people on a different level. And it makes you appreciate the little things. I think sometimes we take for granted what we have in the United States and in the culture that we have because we haven't necessarily been outside of our culture. So working overseas kind of gives you an ability to understand that we have it really good in the United States, and might make you really appreciate what you have at home. And you make long-lasting relationships. If you go overseas and you work at a company or a corporation, you can develop ties with people in other nations that can actually become lifelong friends, and years down the road, if you want to go back and visit, you kind of have somebody that you can connect with and stay with if you want to go. So I'm going to show you this chart here. This was a survey done by the Global Talent Strategy, which is like a research organization. And they took this poll with 162,000 people in 66 countries. And what this shows here is the reasons why people chose to work overseas. And so as you can see, the number one at 53% was the opportunity to broaden experience. Number two, better career opportunities. So sometimes with the way the economy has been, you can actually find jobs overseas that you aren't able to find here in the United States just because your skill set and your education in the United States is very valuable, and other nations will want you to work for them. Number three was challenging oneself. It's pretty straightforward. New experience, acquiring work experience, get to know different cultures, starting an international career, have a better standard of living, learn a new language. I think that's really key. Even for a lot of us, especially as communication majors, if you're a communication major, you have to take 2 classes in another language. And so being in another country and working overseas kind of gives you that opportunity to develop that language. So if you've taken Spanish, for example, you could go to South America or maybe Mexico or somewhere and put that into practice, whereas it's kind of hard to become fluent when you're just doing it in class. So that was one of the top reasons. Meet new people, build a network. I kind of addressed that. Start up a new life. This was one of the reasons, which maybe doesn't apply to us in the United States, but 12% of people said that one of their reasons was because they had a bad economic situation in their own country. 9% said making a change in the world, and so a lot of times you can go to another country and work where there's a need, and so maybe you want to work for a nonprofit organization that's helping orphans in Thailand, or helping people that are, trapped in sex trafficking or whatever. You can make a difference by working overseas. Better climate, I don't know, 8%. And then 3% said because they had a relationship with someone overseas or their family. So I just thought that was interesting to hear why other people have really done that. And also this is a chart to show you, this is by the same company, the Global Talent Strategy. And what this shows is it shows a ranking of people wrote down on this survey their #1 country of choice, their #1 city of choice, and their #1 employer that they would want to work for. And so, as you can see, USA won out, #1. But the #1 city wasn't in the United States, which I thought was interesting. It was London, England. And the #1 employer that people wanted to work for was Google. And so, as you can see, #2, United Kingdom, 3, Canada, my home, my native land. Yeah, so actually not all of these countries, or not all of these, I think all of these companies, the employers, were American, but like number 10, I believe it is a Swedish organization, Unilever. And so, yeah, you could go to number 4, Australia, which I highly recommend. I've been there, and develop your skills and stuff. So I'm going to hand it over to Shelby, who's going to talk to us a little bit about cultural sensitivity. And so now that we've kind of talked about the reasons why you maybe would want to go overseas, there's really some concepts that I think are important to understand before you actually go overseas and maybe work for in one of these cities that you have on this list here. So thanks.
Okay, initially to start off with, I'd like to show you a video. It goes over what culture is. To understand cultural sensitivity, I think you need to understand what it is to be a culture, or to call yourself a culture. So I don't want to, sorry, I'm a little technologically challenged. So this is actually a professor, and I forget his name, he'll introduce himself, but he actually speaks
culture in essence
he speaks about culture. Sorry about that.
The reason for our being and the embededness, the context of what we are, because it is a learned behavior which we have grown up with and soaked up to give us the direction in terms of how we feel about things, how we see things, how we evaluate them. And it makes us part of the tribe. That's what culture is all about. Business is not just a financial transaction. Business is a Socio means the social part, the human part, the interactive part. And unless we are able to convince our partner that we should be in a partnership and that that partnership should last, that it should not be a transaction but a relationship, we will have either worse conditions or no transaction at all. We try in international business to find commonalities on the cultural level so that the transaction goes better. So that's why, for example, many business people go out playing golf, because with their partner, they then establish we're both into golf, and we're both pretty good. Or they go on a ski trip. So to, again, culturally merge a little bit or converge that we are all alpine people. Absolutely. You can, culture in essence is the dimension which, apart from the economic component, drives any transaction or any relationship.
And I'll go ahead and stop it there. Just some key points that he pointed out was that culture, sensitivity, and actually having a business transaction, it is a relationship. So like he said, if you think of it as from a financial perspective, you're really not going to get on the same level with your client working in an international business setting. So one of the, I want to go ahead and just define culture sensitivity, which culture sensitivity means being aware that the culture differences and similarities exist and have an effect on values, learning, and behavior. So basically the key word that stood out to me in that was being aware. Okay, what does it mean to be aware and how can I relate it to the business world? So for me, it's like, it means research, it means doing your homework, it means going through and, okay, I'm going to this place, I need to do my background check and find out what this culture values and apply it to my work. So when I sit down in a meeting, I can actually bring those beliefs, those values, and those aspects to the business setting. And so to further continue, I found this excellent website. It's called World Business Culture. And so this is just a tool I found that if you're interested in doing international business, you can go on. And we've done something like it in class before. Basically, so if just go ahead and shout out a country you want, and I can go China, okay. So you can go ahead and actually click on the country you want, and then background in business to China, and it talks about management styles. So an interesting thing is, okay, I want to find out how the management system works in China because I want to be able to speak to this person, but I need to know how to do it effectively. So we'll go under management styles, and it'll actually tell me all relationships deemed to be unequal. So it's going to basically give you a breakdown of what that management and how to be respectful to managers you deal with in other countries. So in this case, it's China. So we can talk about things that stand out, the Confucian approach, and so cornerstones of all management thinking. So to me, that sticks out as a value. Okay, so maybe I need to go do my homework on that and find out more about that. Oh wait, but if I go down further, it gives me books. So that's an awesome thing, another setting. And so that just links you to either gaining further information, doing that research, doing your homework to make the most of your business experience. And then other things you can find out is communication styles. This is obviously going to relate to it. So we talked about culture and sensitivity, and in communications we talked about respectful forms of communication, and then like high and low context, and just different things that cultures pick up on. And so one of the key things is just picking out things that are going to relate to your meeting and understanding that, okay, because I speak this language, like it says, they find it extremely difficult to say no. So, okay, how am I going to adapt my meeting so they don't have to say no, so that they can actually say, we're not interested, or something that's going to be easier for them to say. And so just taking these into consideration and really applying them to the meeting. And again, it's going to give you suggested readings. So that leads me into my next topic. And basically where I was going with the end of that was, when you do your homework, somebody's not going to want to partner with you if you're not doing your homework. I mean, if you're not doing the research to understand their values, they're going to be like, why do I want to enter a business relationship with them? They don't even understand where I'm coming from. They don't understand our values here, so what's going to make me want to work with them? And so that just reflects poorly upon you if you don't pick up on their values. This leads us into our next topic, which is ethnocentrism, which is actually believing that your culture is better than another culture. So just having that superiority factor and thinking that you're better than others. So it's interesting because this relates directly to culture sensitivity. I mean, if you go in thinking you're better than somebody, thinking, okay, I'm American, and I'm working with this country, and I'm way better than them, and we know more about this industry than they really do, then they're not going to want to partner with you. They're not going to view your opinions as valuable and really want to get into a business transaction with you. So I found this, it's called eHow. I know it's kind of dorky, but all the information on there was applicable to everything we were learning. So basically it walks you through 4 steps. The first one was understanding what ethnocentrism is. So how we do that is by just doing our research and breaking it down, what it is, where it comes from, and how do we prevent it. And then moving further to how it relates to prejudice. So knowing that it's important that it can lead to prejudice. And I mean, you should be proud of where you come from, but doing it in a sense that's not offensive to others. And then recognizing it in yourself. So this is really, it comes down to the first admitting you have a problem is the best way to solve it. I know it's very rhetorical and just not, we don't like to think of ourselves as being prejudiced or having superiority factors, but you need to realize that when you come into a setting, you are proud of where you come from, and you may reflect that without realizing it. And so by doing your homework and using those tools that I showed you earlier, that's a way that you can humble yourself in a business setting. So really bring yourself, we're not asking you to not be patriotic about where you come from, but instead realizing that what you say and how you say it and your actions may be acceptable in the US, but can offend other countries. And then also recognizing in others. I mean, do you really want to enter a transaction with somebody who exhibits these behaviors? I wouldn't think so. So I mean, just kind of, it goes back and forth. I mean, if I'm doing it, they're not going to want to enter with me, but if they're doing it, I'm not going to want to enter a business deal with them. So just what do I do if I come face an international business situation where they're not receptive to what I'm saying and they really just don't understand our values? And that's where personal mission statements and your management will play into role. I mean, you really might have to go back to the U.S. and say, you know what, I tried to work with this company and they really just don't see like they fit our values. So it's understanding that it's not just us who are ethnocentric, it can be other people. And I think it's important to understand that and to realize that. And so I will definitely leave into Matt, and he's gonna have some extra culture sensitivity facts, just different ways that you can show culture sensitivity and ways you can be ethnocentric. Thanks.
Thank you, Shelby. As Shelby was talking about trying not to be ethnocentric abroad, you need to understand that. And you also need to understand your strengths and your weaknesses as an American citizen or whatever culture you come from. That being said, there are different ways that people interact verbally and non-verbally. I want to talk about some of the non-verbal cues that you need to be aware of when you go abroad. People act differently in every single culture. I interact differently when I'm in a culture down in Texas, or when I'm here in Kansas City, or when I'm in New York with my mom's side of the family. It definitely alters how people see you, how you perceive others when you deal with people from different cultures non-verbally. Before I go on, there's a funny little tidbit in Martin Nakayama that stated that George W. Bush put up the hook 'em horn sign for the University of Texas, and there was a picture of that taken, and people in Norway thought that that was a sign for him being a sadist. So people in Norway actually believe that our former president, George W. Bush, worshiped the devil. So even though it was just in good fun, you have to be aware of your surroundings and what stage you're on also. Proxemics, that's the study of how people use their space in personal life and in their work life. It's going to change for you in different cultures when you're working abroad. I know in London that people, having traveled there before, it's a very low contact culture, meaning that there's not very much handshaking, there's not very much proximity towards other people. People try to keep their distance. Okay. I actually talked to Dr. Samante, who teaches modern American history here at Rockhurst, and she is an immigrant from the Philippines, and so she had some interesting points how she interacts whenever she goes back home. It's a very high contact culture over in the Philippines just because it's a smaller place. There's not as much land over in the Philippines. So whenever she's on a bus, be ready for people to be right up in your business, right? Touching up on you. She said that she catches herself getting frustrated all the time whenever she goes back home. She's even noticed that people in the Philippines just let things go. It's not even, it's part of your silence is also part of your nonverbal communication over there. She was in a taxi cab with her mother, and she thought that the meter was running up on her, and she had the nerve to say something to the taxi cab driver, and her mother nudged her and told her to be quiet, but she even caught herself afterwards. She said she should have just not said anything and embarrassed the taxi cab driver for it because it was just an extra $1.50 or something. But definitely you have to be aware of where you are and what's acceptable. If you were on a business meeting with, say, Google over in London and something like that happened in a low contact culture, your coworkers would probably look down upon that. Yeah, so that's the difference between contact cultures and non-contact cultures. Non-contact cultural groups, people tend to maintain more space, touch less often. It's pretty self-explanatory. Haptics. Haptics is any form of nonverbal communication involving touching. So that whether it be handshaking, brushing up against somebody in a car, like Dr. Samante had just said. It's really important to understand how to greet somebody in a business setting, whether it be here in town, whether it be in London, anywhere abroad. So you should definitely do your homework on how to give a good handshake. In Germany, they like a firm, brisk handshake, and it's done very frequently. So you can definitely pick up on something when I know here that I don't appreciate a weak handshake, but even in Islamic countries, Mooch, you can probably testify to this. I read that it's almost better to do it gently with two hands over the top, and you hold hands for a while, right? It's not firm and brisk. So just keep up with your haptics, with your handshakes. It's very important to make that first impression right once you're walking into a business setting. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Mujtaba.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so as Matt described about like different particular instances going abroad, like such as handshakes and stuff, I'll touch broadly on diversity because you will run into this obviously when you go to a different country. You will be challenged linguistically, politically, and socially. So these are like tools that you learn in university, college here, that you can apply in real life words, in real life examples, as Candace mentioned earlier. Some things to keep in mind is like there are classes through your employers that offer diversity training or cross-cultural training before they send you over. There's cultural awareness, intercultural competence, and how to assimilate to a new land. These are all ideas and good tools to be familiar with before you head out to the new land that you might go to. So we'll start out with diversity training. What is diversity training? It's to facilitate intercultural communication among various gender and ethnic racial groups, and then cross-cultural training to familiarize with other cultural norms. This is important, I think, and more important than diversity training because familiarizing with the cultural norms will get you the extra meeting or the extra interview that you are going there for business. For example, in Chinese culture, they like to get to know you personally. So if you understand their cultural norms and go along with that, they are more interested in your personal life than getting straight down to business. So this will help you more in the long run. Intercultural competence, the ability to behave effectively and appropriately in interacting across cultures. This is very important because acting and behaving effectively towards a particular culture or country that you're in will help you in the long run. So assimilation, this is now the part where you're at the new country and then you're trying to fit in. So before you get there, like Shelby mentioned, you can do a country-specific online search. Now, there are different searches online, but the one I found is a little different, and I'll show you. For the Central for Intercultural Learning. So here is, it's a pretty easy website. Just click English, and then I'll just pick like the first either country. So like country insights. It has like a bunch of neat tools for that specific country that you're wanting to know about. So for instance, you can even select like, for instance, Afghanistan, okay? And then you can see all these different subheadings. So like conversation styles, emotions and stuff. It goes a little beyond Shelby's website, but it does a pretty good job of explaining to you like how you should act in that country. For example,
like my website's gonna relate directly to the business side, so when you're dealing with managers and actually, whereas his is going to go even further into the media, political, and other aspects within the culture. So just to clarify that, I'm sorry, I should touch base on that.
Correct. For example, in Afghanistan, it's generally okay to be affectionate, so you know that when you get there. Just like in any country, before you get there, you can like research about it, so you can, you know, go the extra mile and extend that handshake or the kiss on the cheek. So it's a very important tool, and I highly recommend you use that before you venture off. Knowing customs, proper etiquette. Again, that website does a very good job of explaining the customs and the proper etiquettes. Again, it's very important to do that, otherwise you will offend your host, and you know, things can go badly from there. Language ability is another key important to assimilation, because knowing how to get along, reading the signs, getting around from city to city, this is little things that will matter in the long run. You wouldn't think you need to memorize the whole language, but what I'm saying is like just key phrases like hello, how are you, where's the nearest restroom, things like that will make your life a lot easier. And again, lastly, for assimilation, family-related issues. So if your spouse wanted to come, are there accommodations for her or your brother or sister? Little things like that make your experience abroad easier. If you have somebody with you that can share like different experiences with you, it will make your assimilation process easier. So keeping all that in mind, how to become successful. So in the world of hospitality, the customer has the upper hand. To remain competitive, it is fundamental for organizations not only to meet consumer hopes, but also to exceed them. So, how does one achieve this? Well, by understanding business culture, looking through a different lens, and then using Hofstede states that there are 5 dimensions to differences between national cultures. Keeping these dimensions in view, strategies were adopted for the culture integration. So dimension 1, power distance. I think this is a pretty important one. In a large power distance culture, employees accept that they are unequal. In the United States, the power distance between workers and CEOs or bosses are not that far apart than countries such as like Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, where the power distance is pretty significant. So in small power distance culture, all staffs feel equal. So when you're here in America and you're working at, say, a pharmacy or some kind of retail post, when you're working, you feel equal with your partner next to you or your employer. But in other countries, you could be working in the same position, but the power distance will be different. So you just have to keep that in mind, depending on what country you're in. Dimension 2, uncertainty avoidance. This dimension relates to risk-taking, attitude to change, and adoption of new initiatives. So we like to understand what we're getting into before we actually do it. So more research of the company will help in this aspect. Individualism is dimension 3, the extent to which people operate as individuals as opposed to acting collectively and representing groups. Some companies usually separate their workforce into little groups, and they focus on teamwork. But other countries and companies have very individualistic one-on-one attention, like you do your work and then that's it. So English-speaking countries tend to be more individualistic. Dimension 4 talks about masculinity and femininity. It includes characteristics such as assertiveness and toughness to achieve tasks at any cost. So this can be just like rude, like low. It could just be like mean. You could be mean to you. Like if you're in a different country and somebody asks you to like do something in a different way, you could get offended. So you just have to take the cultural context of that company and the country you're in to make your feelings, I guess, adapt. Dimension 5 talks about long-term versus short-term. Western countries favor short-term organization, whereas Eastern countries take a long time orientation. This pretty much covers how like organizations work as a team for specific projects, for specific goals. So if there's like a project that comes up, you might be put into a team or a group. So that's what that is. So we talked about culture sensitivity, ethnocentrism, and how to work abroad. Do you guys have any questions?
And then we also wanted to a little bit further expand. I know we talked about the U-curve in class. So we're trying to set you up with tools when you go over to other countries and just explain to you that process. It's not necessarily going to completely eliminate that process of occurring. So even though we give you these tools and we give you these resources, if you enter a culture, it doesn't mean you're not going to have culture shock and you're not going to have to do that initial adjustment. So understanding that, but being able to apply these tools to make that process easier. So like Mujtaba said, do you have any further questions? I'm sorry, I forgot to add that in to the slide. I mean, is there any place you've been or?
I've been on vacation, but like outside the country, but we usually stay on like a resort, so we don't really have a lot of contact with that country. I would say like the only contact we have is with our taxi drivers, and they're usually like absolutely nuts. Like they drive 100 miles an hour.
So you
just,
could
like,
pick
down
up
the
on
middle
those
of the
initial
road.
cues then.
And you're like terrified, and they're just like talking and talking.
And so
trying
where,
to be polite, but you're really like, I don't want to look out the window right now.
yeah, where have you been on vacation?
The most recent one was when we went to the Bahamas.
Nice. So were you able to pick up on any of the things we talked about? Like just not, obviously not from a business sense, yours would be more of a vacation.
Right. Definitely the contact, because they all like want to shake your hand. They want
Exactly.
to back. I'll get your bag. And you're like, but my stuff. Okay, that's fine. And they just like throw it in a taxi. And you're like, I guess I'll go on that one.
Yeah, so it just kind of throws you through.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of a
So,
shock when you get there.
Was that like easier to have your parents present? Like Matt initially, or Mooch initially talked about having somebody there who could actually go through that culture shock with you in that process?
Yes, because they've been through something like that before,
Mm-hmm.
because they've traveled more than I have. So they were just like, oh, it's fine, it's not a big deal. So I feel like going through that, I now know more of what to expect if I go somewhere else, like in the same country. Like, I know how they're going to treat me and how they're going to approach me, and their willingness to be like, oh, I'll carry your 50-pound suitcase.
So to that certain like high-tech context culture, it sounds like what you're describing to me, did that come off as, obviously you said it was a shock to you, but would you put yourself in that environment again, or did you find that adjustment?
Oh yeah, I'd definitely go back. It almost made it easier to communicate with them because they were so willing to be open and inviting, so I would definitely go back.
So you found that relatability then with
And
them
then when you come
initially.
home, you're just like, oh,
Exactly. No, definitely.
So yeah.
So do you have any further questions about what we talked about, or are you interested in international business? Is it something you're looking at? Obviously you're in a communications class, so I wasn't sure.
Well, I'm not exactly a communications major, so this is kind of out of my element per se, but I definitely think like other cultures are really interesting, and I think business, I want to be a physical therapist, so I think working with physical therapy like around the world would be really interesting.
So do you think some of the things we talked about today, do you think that can actually apply to the healthcare setting? I mean, dealing, because you're obviously going to deal with people from different countries. I mean, if they're visiting, they might be going through physical therapy and seeking healthcare services in the U.S.
Absolutely.
So is that going to, you think, affect kind of how you're dealing with your patients? I mean, obviously, if we have somebody here who's from a culture where touch really isn't a good thing, I mean, is that going to change how you're dealing with your patient?
It's definitely going to change how you deal with your patient, and it's going to be a learning curve for both people. Like, you're going to have to be like, well, I'm going to have to move your leg now, and they're going to just have to be okay with you coming into their personal space. And they might, we're going the masculine and feminine thing, like they might see you as being really
especially
assertive.
Since you're a female yourself, helping a male.
Like, well, you're way too assertive for like where I'm from.
I mean, I guess the one attractive thing I found about healthcare is that it's just that universal language. So where it's, I mean, most of those medical terms are used in every country. So you probably won't have communications problems there. But like we talked about, just that initial unhidden culture sensitivity and just that overall mannerisms that you're bringing forth. Well, thank you so much for coming. You're like our...
Is Dr. Graham?
Oh yeah, do you have any questions?
No.
I was like getting in workshop mode with her.
No.
I don't have any questions.
Yeah, but if you could fill out our evaluation and just kind of give us... Oh, you did. You're a rock star. Thank you so much for coming, and we appreciate you.